I fainted while cleaning the roof of my son's house. My daughter-in-law dumped a bucket of ice water over me and snapped, "Lazy old woman, stop napping." At that moment, I just smiled and made a single phone call that left her screaming nonstop. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has traveled. You're going to end up with nothing. We're sending you to a nursing home. Lyra's words cut through the lawyer's office like a knife, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the polished mahogany table as she delivered them with casual cruelty. I sat frozen, hands gripping the arms of my chair, feeling the weight of my 59 years pressing down on me like stones. The room was silent, save for the tick of an antique wall clock. My son Darren shifted nervously in his seat beside his wife, but he didn't speak. Not a word in defense of me. The mother who had raised him alone, worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed everything for his future. Now, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Richardson, the lawyer, cleared his throat, keeping a professional tone. Let's maintain civility. We're here to discuss asset division following your husband's passing. Lyra laughed, a sharp, shattering sound. Civil? She's been living in our house rent-free for 2 years. It's time she learns what the real world looks like. Our house. She called it our house, though Richard and I had bought it 35 years ago, long before Darren even thought of marrying her. Yet in the 2 years since my husband's death, Lyra had managed to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. Mom, Darren's voice was barely audible, his gaze fixed somewhere other than me. Maybe it would be better if you had professional care. You know, people your age, people my age. As if 59 meant I was ready for the grave. As if the woman who had potty trained him, stayed up all night when he had pneumonia, cheered at every baseball game, was suddenly useless. I looked at my son, truly looked at him. When did his eyes turn so cold? When did his spine bend so easily under his wife's influence? This wasn't the boy who once clambered into my bed during thunderstorms, begging for my special Sunday pancakes. The house needs to be sold, Lyra continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. We found a lovely facility about an hour away, very affordable. They even have bingo nights. She spoke as if shipping me off to strangers was some kind of generous gift. Darren's Uncle Tom and Richard's sister Margaret sat silently, some uneasy, others amused by my humiliation. Margaret even chuckled. Well, Glenda, you always said you wanted to try new things. New things? Like being abandoned by the family I had spent my life building? Mr. Richardson shuffled his papers, neutral but professional. Mrs. Patterson, you do understand that without a clear will from your late husband regarding the house, and given that your son is co-owner on several accounts. Lyra cut him off, waving dismissively. Don't you, Glenda? You understand this is for everyone's own good? I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell them exactly what I thought of this betrayal. But instead, I sat, shrinking further with each passing second. The woman who had worked double shifts at the diner while attending night school, who had raised a child alone after Richard's first heart attack, seemed to have vanished entirely. The nursing home has an opening next week, Darren said, still avoiding my gaze. We've already put down the deposit. Already put down the deposit. They had planned my fate, arranged every detail without even pretending to include me. I was being discarded like old furniture. Tom finally spoke, leaning forward in his chair. Hold on. This seems rushed. Maybe Glenda should have time to consider her options. What options? Lyra's tone snapped. She has no income beyond Social Security. She can't maintain a house this size. Be realistic, Tom. Realistic? That's what they called it when they wanted to justify treating me like trash. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat again. There is one matter we need to address before proceeding. Your late husband left specific instructions regarding a sealed document in my safe. It is not to be opened unless certain conditions are met. Lyra rolled her eyes. What kind of conditions? I'm not at liberty to share all the details, but I believe the conditions may have finally been met today. He stood, moving deliberately toward a large safe tucked into the corner of his office. Richard had always been meticulous, careful about details most people overlooked. Even in death, perhaps he had found a way to protect me from this nightmare. "This is ridiculous," Lyra muttered under her breath, but I noticed her confidence faltering slightly as Mr. Richardson retrieved a manila envelope sealed with red wax. My name was written across it in Richard's familiar handwriting, along with a date from 3 months before his death. He had somehow anticipated this moment. Mr. Richardson carefully broke the seal and pulled out a DVD and several official-looking documents. "Mrs. Patterson, your husband left specific instructions that you should view this immediately if ever threatened with eviction or mistreatment by family members." The words hung in the room like a challenge. Lyra went pale, and Darren finally turned toward me, confusion etched across his face. As Mr. Richardson set up the small television, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a tiny spark of hope flickering in the darkness that had consumed my life. The screen came to life, and there was Richard, sitting in this very office, looking straight into the camera with that familiar, serious expression. Tears sprang to my eyes at the sight of him. But his opening words silenced everyone else in the room. "If you're watching this, Glenda, it means someone is trying to take advantage of you, and I made sure that would never happen." The video paused briefly as Mr. Richardson adjusted the volume, but Richard's words echoed in my mind, "Someone is trying to take advantage of you." I could feel Lyra's gaze burning into me from across the table. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by something close to fear. Darren sat frozen, mouth slightly agape, struggling to comprehend what was unfolding. When the video resumed, Richard's calm authority filled the room. "I've been watching, sweetheart. I've seen what's changed since I got sick. I've seen how our son allows his wife to treat you, and I won't stand for it." My throat tightened. Even from beyond the grave, Richard was defending me in ways Darren never had. But as the video continued, memories flooded back, dragging me through the painful journey that had brought me to this point. It began 18 months ago, just 6 months after Richard's funeral. Lyra had suggested they move in temporarily to help me through my grief. At first, it seemed like a blessing. The house felt hollow without Richard, and having Darren nearby felt comforting. But within weeks, subtle shifts began. Lyra started rearranging the kitchen, claiming she was helping me organize. She discarded Richard's favorite coffee mug because it was chipped. She replaced family photos in the living room with her own modern artwork, saying, "The old pictures make the space look dated." I should have spoken up then. I should have set boundaries. But I was drowning in grief. Having my son close felt like my lifeline, so I stayed silent while she slowly erased Richard from our home. The worst part wasn't the redecorating, it was watching my relationship with Darren disintegrate. Lyra positioned herself between us in every conversation, answering questions meant for him, making decisions about our lives without consulting me. "Mom, don't you think you're getting a little forgetful?" Darren asked one evening after Lyra claimed I'd left the stove on. I hadn't forgotten, I'd been interrupted by her phone call. When I tried to explain, Lyra smiled patronizingly and patted my shoulder. "It's normal at your age, Glenda. Nothing to be embarrassed about." "Your age?" She was only 15 years younger than me, yet she spoke as if I were ancient and incapable. The financial pressure crept in subtly, too. "Property taxes are rising," she would say during dinner. "The heating bill this winter was huge. Maybe it's time to downsize." Never explicitly, but always implying I was a burden. The house was far too expensive for me to maintain. Ignoring the mortgage Richard and I had long since paid off, were the savings I'd set aside for upkeep and taxes. Somehow, in her twisted version of reality, I was a liability. I began giving them money for household expenses, thinking I was helping. When the refrigerator needed replacing, I paid. When they wanted to renovate the master bathroom, I contributed half. Each time, Lyra thanked me with that same syrupy sweetness, then added another subtle jab about how difficult it must be for me to manage on a fixed income. but perhaps the cruelest part was the isolation. My longtime friends stopped visiting because Lyra made them uncomfortable with her thinly veiled comments about not wanting to overstimulate me. My weekly bridge club dwindled to a monthly meeting, and then disappeared altogether because Darren fretted over me driving in traffic. Slowly, imperceptibly, I became a prisoner in my own home, my freedom dictated by their approval for everything. From grocery trips to doctor's appointments. When had I become so fragile? When had I allowed myself to shrink into the shadow of the woman I once was? The woman I used to be had survived Richard's first heart attack when Darren was only 12. I had juggled 2 jobs, managed all household responsibilities, helped with homework, and still found the energy to drive him to soccer practice. I had been strong, resilient. But grief has a way of exposing vulnerabilities. And Lyra had recognized mine immediately. She hadn't moved in to help me, she had moved in to take over. The video pulled me back to the present. Richard's face filled the screen, his voice calm but firm as he explained the legal safeguards he had put in place. I want you to know, Glenda, that I saw everything. I watched how Lyra eyed our house, our belongings, calculating their worth. I heard the conversations she thought I couldn't hear, from my hospital bed. Darren flinched, glancing nervously at his wife. Lyra's face had gone ghostly white. I need to tell you about one conversation I overheard, Richard continued. The night before my last surgery. Lyra and Darren were in the hospital corridor. She was already making plans. My heart hammered. I remembered that night vividly. I had been sitting at Richard's bedside, holding his hand as he slept fitfully before the procedure that would ultimately take him. I had stepped out briefly to get coffee. She told our son that once I was gone, it would be easy to convince you that you needed professional care, that the house was too much for you. She had already researched nursing homes, Glenda, before I had even died. The room was deathly silent. I could hear the clock ticking, Lyra's shallow breaths, Darren's stunned disbelief radiating across the table. But what she doesn't know, Richard's voice grew stronger, more determined, is that I made preparations. I protected you, sweetheart, in ways she never saw coming. Mr. Richardson paused the video and looked directly at me. Are you ready to hear the rest, Mrs. Patterson? Because what comes next will change everything. I surveyed the room at the faces of those who had been poised to ship me off to strangers, and I felt something I hadn't in months, a surge of the old strength, the old determination. Play it, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. I want to hear everything. Richard's face returned to the screen. Even through the grainy footage, I could see the determination in his eyes, the same look he had when tackling a complex problem at work. Glenda, what I'm about to tell you may sound complicated, but listen carefully. 3 months ago, when Dr. Martinez told me the cancer was spreading faster than expected, I knew I had to protect you from what I could already foresee. My chest tightened. Richard had never shared that the cancer was progressing so quickly. He had borne that burden alone, all while making plans to shield me from the fallout. I've restructured our assets in ways Lyra doesn't understand, and frankly, in ways our son doesn't either. The house, the savings, the investments, none of it is as it appears. Lyra made a small, choking noise. Darren gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. You see, Richard continued, adopting the calm, instructive tone he always used when explaining something complex, I established a revocable living trust 18 months ago. The house isn't simply in both your names anymore, Glenda. It's held in the trust, with you as the primary beneficiary and trustee. Mr. Richardson paused the video and pulled out one of the documents from the envelope. This is the trust agreement, Mrs. Patterson. While your name appears on various documents as co-owner with your son, the legal reality is far different. I stared at the papers, trying to process their meaning. Legal documents had always intimidated me, but I could see Lyra's color draining with each word the lawyer spoke. What does that mean exactly? I whispered. Mr. Richardson smiled, a rare, genuine expression that felt like a small victory. It means, Mrs. Patterson, That you have far more control over your assets than anyone in this room realized, including your son and daughter-in-law. The video resumed. Richard's voice filled the office again. The beautiful thing about a trust, sweetheart, is that it comes with specific protections. I included a clause: if you were ever threatened with forced relocation, or coerced into giving up your home, the trust activates additional safeguards. What kind of safeguards? Darren croaked, his voice barely audible. As if responding from beyond the grave, Richard's calm authority continued. If anyone, including our son, tries to force you from your home or threatens you with institutionalization against your will, they forfeit any claim to inheritance, not just the house, but everything. The room fell into a stunned silence. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. But that's not all, Richard continued, a note of satisfaction in his voice. I also established what's called a protection clause. If anyone ever mistreats you, family members who are supposed to care for you, you have the right to immediately revoke their access to any shared assets. Richard's voice continued from the screen, calm and commanding. Lyra finally spoke, her words strangled and incredulous. This can't be legal. You can't just cut family out like that. Mr. Richardson looked at her with professional detachment. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, it is completely legal. Your father-in-law was meticulous. He consulted 3 separate attorneys to ensure this trust would hold up under any challenge. Richard leaned slightly forward on the screen, his expression grave. Glenda, you need to understand something. I loved our son, but I watched him change after he married Lyra. I watched him become weak, spineless. I watched him let his wife disrespect you in ways that would have horrified the boy I raised. Darren flinched as though struck, his eyes darting between the screen and me, confusion and shame etched across his face. I'm not doing this to be cruel, Richard continued. I'm doing this because you deserved better than to spend your final years being treated like a burden. You sacrificed everything for this family, and this family owes you dignity and respect, not manipulation, not threats. The video paused as Richard took a small sip of water. I could see how frail he had become in those final months, yet his voice remained steady. Here's what the trust means in practical terms. You own the house outright, no co-ownership, no shared ownership. You own it. The bank accounts Lyra thinks are joint? Controlled by the trust, which means controlled by you. The investment portfolio Darren assumes he'll inherit? Yours too, as long as you're alive and being treated with respect. I felt lightheaded. All these months, feeling powerless, believing I was dependent on their charity, and all along, I had been in control. But Richard, I whispered at the screen, why didn't you tell me? As if anticipating my question, he answered, I didn't tell you initially because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I hoped our son would protect you the way a son should. I hoped Lyra would treat you with the respect you deserved. But I prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't. Mr. Richardson pulled out another document. This is the key provision, Mrs. Patterson. The trust states that if you are ever threatened with forced institutionalization by family members, or if you are subjected to verbal abuse or manipulation regarding your living situation, you have the right to invoke what your husband called the nuclear option. Nuclear option? My voice was barely audible. Complete severance, Mr. Richardson explained. You can cut off their access to any inheritance, remove them entirely from your will, and reclaim any money or property you've given them over the past 2 years. The implications hit me like a tidal wave. The money I'd given them for house repairs, the new refrigerator, countless other expenses, I could demand it back. The renovations Lyra insisted on, claiming they improved the house? She had been spending my money to improve my property. Lyra seemed to realize this too. Her face shifted from pale to green, her hands gripping the arms of her chair as if she might collapse. There's more, Richard continued, his tone carrying a faint note of grim satisfaction. Glenda, I documented everything. Every conversation I overheard, every act of disrespect, every manipulation, it's all recorded in a journal Mr. Richardson has copies of. Mr. Richardson held up a thick-bound notebook. Your husband was meticulous, Mrs. Patterson. Dates, times, witnesses when possible. Every instance, from Lyra throwing away your belongings without permission to Darren failing to defend you when she made cruel remarks about your age, it's all here. I stared at the notebook, overwhelmed. Even when I thought I was completely alone, Richard had been protecting me. The choice is yours now, sweetheart, Richard said, his voice resolute. You can forgive them and continue as before if you believe they've learned their lesson and will treat you with the respect you deserve. Or, you can exercise the power I've given you to ensure your dignity and security. The video had shown Richard leaning back in his chair, looking directly into the camera with an expression full of love and determination. Either way, never let anyone make you feel powerless again. You are stronger than you realize, and you deserve far better than what they've been giving you. As the screen went dark, I sat in the stunned silence of the lawyer's office, feeling as though I was seeing the world clearly for the first time in 2 years. The power had always been in my hands, I just hadn't known it existed. The silence after Richard's video was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the kind of silence that comes when the world shifts on its axis, when everything you thought you knew reveals itself as an illusion. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Patterson, I need to explain exactly what this means for your current situation. As of this moment, you have several options available to you. I nodded, though my mind was still reeling. The woman who had walked into this office an hour ago, the woman who felt powerless and discarded, was gone. In her place sat someone I barely recognized, someone holding all the cards in a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. First, Mr. Richardson continued, opening a thick folder, let me show you the actual state of your finances. He spread a series of documents across the table, bank statements, investment portfolios, property assessments, numbers that made my eyes widen in disbelief. You currently have assets worth approximately $2 million, Mrs. Patterson. The house is valued at $450,000 and is entirely yours. Your investment portfolio has grown significantly since your husband's death, thanks to his careful planning and the rising market. Lyra made a strangled sound. That's impossible. The house has a mortgage. The accounts are joint. Actually, Mr. Richardson said calmly, the mortgage was paid off through the trust 18 months ago. What you believed were mortgage payments were actually contributions to a maintenance fund, deposited into a separate account for property upkeep. I stared at him. You mean when they told me I needed to contribute to the mortgage? You were paying into your own home maintenance fund, he confirmed. Every dollar you gave them for household expenses went into accounts that you control. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They had been taking my money while making me feel like I was a financial burden. They had convinced me I couldn't afford my own home, while secretly depositing my contributions into accounts I owned. Darren finally spoke, his voice hollow. Mom, we didn't know. I swear we didn't know about the trust. But you knew about the lies, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. You knew you were making me pay for things that were already covered. You knew Lyra was throwing away Richard's belongings and treating me like I was incompetent. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find words that could undo any of it. Mr. Richardson pulled out another document. There's something else, Mrs. Patterson. Your husband included specific provisions for what should happen if the conditions of mistreatment were met. What kind of provisions? I asked, my voice barely audible. Financial recovery provisions, Mr. Richardson said. Any money you've given to family members under false pretenses can be reclaimed immediately. This includes the $15,000 you provided for bathroom renovations, $8,000 for the new refrigerator and appliances, and roughly $24,000 in contributions you thought were mortgage and utilities over the past 18 months. My breath caught. Nearly $50,000, money I had scraped together from my savings, money I had worried about spending because I believed I was living on a fixed income. Furthermore, Mr. Richardson continued, since they were living in your home rent-free while deceiving you about finances, you are entitled to charge back rent for the entire period. back rent?" I whispered. "At current market rates for a house this size, approximately $2,400 per month," he explained. "For 18 months, that totals $43,200. Lyra shot to her feet, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. "This is insane. You can't just decide we owe you money for living in the family home." "It's not the family home," Mr. Richardson said matter-of-factly. "It's Mrs. Patterson's home. You have been living there as guests who systematically deceived your hostess about her own finances." "Darren," Lyra demanded, "say something." Lyra turned to her husband, her voice trembling with desperation. But Darren was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read: shame, certainly, maybe regret, but also the dawning realization of just how badly they had treated me. "Mom," he said softly. "I didn't make this happen, Darren." "You did," I replied, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You watched your wife humiliate me in my own home. You stood by while she threw away your father's belongings. You never once defended me when she made me feel like a burden. She convinced me you thought I was confused, that I needed help managing things. But I was never confused, Darren. I was grieving. There's a difference." Mr. Richardson pulled out another document. "Mrs. Patterson, there's one more thing your husband wanted you to see." He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Glenda," it began. "If you are reading this, my worst fears have come to pass. Our son has allowed his wife to treat you with disrespect and cruelty that no mother should ever endure." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read silently. "You are not the weak, confused old woman they've tried to make you believe you are. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You raised our son to be a good man, but somehow he lost his way. Do not let his failures diminish your worth." The letter continued for 2 pages, reminding me of my strength, my accomplishments, and the sacrifices I had made for our family. It ended with words that struck me like lightning. "You have spent your life caring for others. Now it is time to care for yourself. You owe them nothing except what they earn through respect and kindness. And sweetheart, they haven't earned anything." I folded the letter carefully and looked around the table. Tom and Margaret stared at their hands, clearly uncomfortable. Lyra was crying now, but it wasn't remorse, it was the realization that her scheme had crumbled. "And Darren," I said, turning to him. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time in years. "Mom," he whispered. "What can I do to fix this?" I stood slowly, feeling every bit of my 59 years, but also stronger than I had in months. "I don't know if this can be fixed, Darren, but I do know what I'm going to do." I turned to Mr. Richardson. "I want them out of my house by the end of the week. I want every penny they owe me calculated and documented. And I want to make sure this can never happen again. Of course, Mrs. Patterson. I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork," he said. Lyra's cries grew louder, more desperate. "Glenda, please. We can work this out. We're family." I looked at her for a long moment, the woman who had systematically tried to destroy my self-worth and steal my security. "Family doesn't lie to each other," I said quietly. "Family doesn't make each other feel worthless. Family doesn't threaten to throw each other away like garbage." I gathered my purse and Richard's letter, feeling lighter with each step toward the door. "I'll be in touch about the arrangements, Mr. Richardson. And thank you for keeping my husband's promise to protect me." As I walked out, I heard Lyra's voice behind me, high-pitched and panicked, demanding to know how she would pay me back and where she would live. But for the first time in 2 years, her problems weren't mine. I was finally free. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different. It was still the same place where Richard and I had raised Darren, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where we had built a life together, but now it felt truly mine again, in a way it hadn't for the past 2 years. Lyra was in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, fragments of her conversation drifting toward me. Completely unreasonable, she can't just kick us out, there has to be some legal loophole. She hung up when she saw me, turning around with eyes red and swollen. Yet behind the tears, I saw a calculating glint I recognized all too well. Glenda, we need to talk, she said, trying to sound reasonable. No, we don't, I replied, heading for the stairs. You need to pack. You have until Sunday to be out of my house. Her composure cracked. Your house? This has been Darren's home too. He grew up here. You can't just throw your own son out. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and faced her. Darren chose to stand by while you humiliated me. He chose to lie to me about my own finances. He chose to let you treat me like I was senile and incompetent. Those were his choices. Now he lives with the consequences. He's your son, she practically shouted. What kind of mother throws out her own child? Her question hit, stirring up the guilt I had carried for so long, but Richard's words echoed in my mind. You owe them nothing except what they earn through respect and kindness. The kind of mother who finally learned that being a parent doesn't mean letting them destroy you, I said quietly. The kind of mother who knows that love without respect isn't love at all. Lyra's expression shifted. Look, I know things got out of hand. I said things that hurt your feelings, but we're family, Glenda. Families forgive. Families work things out. Hurt my feelings? I repeated incredulously. You convinced me I was losing my mind. You made me pay for things that were already paid for. You threw away my husband's belongings without asking. You threatened to put me in a nursing home. That wasn't hurting my feelings, Lyra. That was psychological abuse. She flinched at the word but quickly recovered. I was just trying to help you. The house is so big, and you seemed overwhelmed. I was grieving, I said firmly. There's a difference between being overwhelmed and being incompetent. But you used my grief to manipulate me, and you trained my son to do the same. At that moment, Darren's car pulled into the driveway, and I could hear his footsteps on the porch. He walked in looking 10 years older than he had at the lawyer's office. Mom, he said as soon as he saw me. Can we please talk? Lyra immediately moved to his side, her hand on his arm in that possessive way I had learned to recognize. I was just explaining to your mother that. Stop, Darren's voice was quiet but firm. He gently removed her hand from his arm, and she looked shocked. Just stop talking for a minute. He looked at me with eyes that reminded me, for a fleeting second, of the little boy he used to be. Mom, I know I messed up. I know I let you down. But please, can you find it in your heart to give me another chance? The part of me that had spent 37 years being his mother wanted to say yes immediately, to forgive him and pretend this was all a bad dream. But the stronger part, the part Richard had protected, knew better. What kind of chance, Darren? A chance to let your wife continue running my life? A chance to keep lying to me about my own money? A chance to keep treating me like a burden? No, I continued. We could set boundaries. We could go to counseling. We could figure out how to make this work. I studied his face, searching for sincerity, for genuine remorse. What I saw instead was desperation. The desperation of a man who had just realized he had lost not just his inheritance, but his free place to live. When was the last time you stood up for me? I asked. When was the last time you told your wife she was wrong to treat me the way she did? He opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer, never. When was the last time you visited me just because you wanted to, not because you needed something? Silence. When was the last time you thanked me for the thousands of dollars I've given you over the past 2 years instead of making me feel guilty for not giving more? His eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were real remorse or just self-pity. I thought I was helping you, he whispered. Lyra said you were getting confused, that you needed us to manage things. And you believed her instead of talking to me directly, I shot back. You believed her when she said I was incompetent, even though I raised you alone after your father's first heart attack. You believed her when she said I couldn't manage my finances, even though I put you through college and saved enough to buy this house outright. Lyra stepped forward, her voice turning wheedling. Glenda, maybe we all made mistakes. Maybe we can start fresh. I promise things will be different. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment she made me feel small and worthless in my own home. Your promise isn't worth anything, Lyra. You promised to love and honor my son, but you turned him into someone I barely recognize. You promised to be part of our family, but you spent 2 years trying to erase me from it. I turned to both of them. You promised to love and protect the people who matter to you. But when it came time to choose between protecting me and keeping your wife happy, you chose her comfort over my dignity, every single time. The silence was broken by Lyra's phone ringing. She glanced at it, then at Darren, panic in her eyes. That's the lawyer I called, she whispered. She says we might have grounds to contest the trust. Answer it, I said calmly. Go ahead and contest it. But while you're spending money on lawyers, I'll be charging you rent for every day you stay in my house, and interest on the money you owe me. Mr. Richardson had been very clear about my legal rights. Lyra's face went white. You're bluffing, she said. I pulled out my phone and showed her the message from Mr. Richardson. Daily rate for continued occupancy, $125 per day. Interest rate on outstanding debt, 8% annually, compounded monthly. All legally enforceable under the terms of the trust. Darren sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Mom, where are we supposed to go? We don't have money for an apartment deposit, especially if we have to pay you back. For a moment, my heart softened. But then I remembered Lyra's words that morning, you're going to end up with nothing and we're sending you to a nursing home. You should have thought about that before you decided I was disposable, I said quietly. I started up the stairs, then paused halfway. Oh, and Lyra, I want my mother's china back and my grandmother's jewelry. All the things you convinced me to store safely in your room. They were gifts, she protested. I smiled for the first time in hours. Prove it. Show me where I signed anything giving those items to you, I said firmly. Show me the documentation, because Mr. Richardson will need a full inventory of everything that must be returned. As I continued up the stairs, I could hear them whispering frantically below, planning, scheming, searching for any way out of the corner they had trapped themselves in. But for the first time in 2 years, their panic wasn't my problem to solve. I entered my bedroom, the room Richard and I had shared for 35 years, and looked around. Tomorrow, I would begin reclaiming my space, my life, my dignity. Tomorrow, I would start healing from the damage they had caused. Tonight, though, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own home, knowing that no one could ever take it away from me again. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen making coffee, actually smiling at the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The house was quiet, genuinely peaceful, not the tense, walking on eggshells quiet it had been with Darren and Lyra living here. They had moved out that Sunday, just as I demanded. It hadn't been graceful. There had been more tears from Lyra, more pleading from Darren, and a few not-so-subtle threats about how I would regret treating family this way. But Mr. Richardson's meticulous documentation made it clear that challenging me legally would cost them far more than they could ever hope to gain. The final accounting had been sobering. Back rent, fraudulent expenses, the value of the belongings they had borrowed, they owed me $127,000. They had managed to pay back $23,000 by selling Lyra's car and some jewelry. The rest would be repaid in monthly installments over 5 years. I had been tempted to forgive the debt. The old me would have done exactly that. But Richard's letter was clear, you owe them nothing except what they earned through respect and kindness. They hadn't earned forgiveness. They had earned consequences. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mom, Darren's hesitant voice said. Uncertain. Hello, Darren, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I was wondering if we could talk. Maybe meet for coffee? I considered him carefully. I've been going to counseling, he continued, individual counseling, not couples. I wanted to understand how everything went so wrong between us. This surprised me. The Darren I knew would have blamed everyone else for his mistakes. And what have you learned? I asked. There was a long pause. That I stopped being your son somewhere along the way. That I became someone I don't even recognize, someone Dad would have been ashamed of. The mention of Richard hit me harder than I expected. Your father loved you, Darren. Even when he was disappointed in you. I know, he whispered, voice cracking slightly. That's part of what makes this so hard. Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you, what I let Lyra do to you. I walked to the window and gazed out at the garden Richard and I had planted together. It was thriving now, nurtured properly after years of neglect. Where is Lyra? I asked. Another pause. We separated 3 months ago. She couldn't handle the financial pressure, or the fact that I finally started standing up to her when she badmouthed you. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that he had finally found his backbone. Sadness that it had taken losing everything for him to find it. She's living with her sister in Phoenix, he continued. She wanted me to declare bankruptcy to get out of paying you back. When I refused, she said I was choosing you over her. And were you? I asked softly. I was choosing to do the right thing, he said. Finally, he was quiet for a moment. Mom. I know this doesn't make up for anything. But I need you to know I'm proud of you. Proud that you stood up to us. Proud that you didn't let us destroy you completely. Tears formed in my eyes, but not tears of sadness. Tears of something I thought I had lost forever, hope. Would you like to come to dinner on Sunday? He asked. I'll make pot roast the way you used to like it, I heard myself say. Are you sure? His voice carried cautious hope. I'm sure. But Darren, we're starting from scratch. You don't get to be my son just because you were born to me. You have to earn that back. I understand. And Mom? I want to earn it back. I want to be the man Dad raised me to be. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I had been a broken woman, feeling powerless and discarded. Today, I was someone who had reclaimed not only my assets, but also my sense of self-worth. The house around me told the story of that transformation. Richard's photographs were back on the mantel. His favorite coffee mug sat where it belonged. The rooms were decorated the way I wanted, not the way someone else thought they should be. I had reconnected with old friends who had been gradually pushed out of my life. My bridge club was meeting here again next Tuesday. I had even started dating, nothing serious, just coffee with a kind widower from church who made me laugh and treated me with respect. The woman who had once been threatened with a nursing home was now volunteering at the local senior center, helping other elderly people understand their financial rights. I had seen too many situations like my own. Adult children taking advantage of grieving parents, weaponizing confusion and isolation. But most importantly, I had learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's manipulation, and I was worth more than that. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, a delivery man held a small package. Glenda Patterson? He asked. I signed for it and glanced at the return address, a jewelry store in Phoenix, Lyra's new city. Inside was my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one Lyra had claimed was lost during their move. There was a note. Mrs. Patterson, I found this among my daughter's belongings. She told me it belonged to her, but the inscription says, to my darling Glenda, with love, Grandma Rose. I thought you should have it back. I'm sorry for any trouble my daughter caused you. Patricia Morrison. I held the pearls in my hands, remembering my grandmother fastening them around my neck on my wedding day. They had been in Lyra's jewelry box all along. Probably the first thing she had hidden when they moved in. But instead of anger, I felt a twinge of pity for Lyra. She had traded a family for stolen jewelry and a life built on lies. In the end, she had lost everything that mattered and kept only what didn't. That evening, I called my neighbor Helen, who had become a good friend again after being frozen out during the Lyra years. Helen, I want to ask you something. Do you remember what I was like before Richard died? Before everything with Darren and his wife? Helen was quiet for a moment. You were strong, Glenda. You were kind, but you didn't let people walk all over you. You spoke your mind. You took care of others, but you also took care of yourself. I feel like I'm finding that person again, I said. Good, Helen replied firmly. I missed her. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was 59, with gray hair, wrinkles, and age spots. But she was also strong, dignified, unbroken. Richard had been right in his letter. I wasn't the weak, confused old woman they tried to make me believe I was. I was the woman who had survived widowhood at 24 and raised a son alone. I was the woman who had worked 2 jobs, put herself through night school, and loved deeply despite great loss. I was enough. I had always been enough. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my own house, in my own bed, living my life on my own terms. Every day after that, I would be free. Darren might earn his way back into my life, or he might not. Either way, I would be fine because I had learned the most important lesson: the only person responsible for my happiness was me. For the first time in years, I was truly, deeply happy. As I turned off the light and settled into bed, I whispered a quiet thank you to Richard for protecting me even beyond the grave, and to myself, for finally finding the courage to accept that protection. Some endings are really beginnings. This was mine. Now, I'm curious about you, the one who's listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. Meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other channel favorites that are guaranteed to surprise you. Thank you for watching all the way through.